he said, you need to be careful because the transaction is doing something with you. And she now refers to it as the post-deal crisis, because in the beginning of the deal, you have lawyers, journalists, and bankers. Everybody tells you you're the king of the world.
This is the story behind the story. This is the human side of leadership in biotech. Willing to win. Biotech leaders against all odds. My guest today is Erich Tauber. In May 2020, he signed a life-changing deal with Merck. But rewind to the beginning. A time with just €500 in a bank account. For 13 years, his company was never funded for longer than 12 months. He took investor calls with a baby in his lap, flew to New York for meetings where the person he was pitching wasn't even in the room. Hundreds of conversations that ended the same way. I wish you all the best, but this will never work. While competitors raised 10 times more than what he raised, Erich stayed lean. That constraint became his edge. It forced radical focus and discipline. He had no plan B, and he believes that's exactly why it worked. As he puts it, you need to get fully exposed and take risks. You need to accept that rewards will take quite some time.
How did you start your morning today?
My boy, and sent him off to school, and I was playing tennis from 7 to 9, like every week.
When did you stop saying you are the CEO of Themis?
I think this started more or less quickly after the acquisition to Merck. Because we were then more or less 100% owned subsidiary of Merck, and I was a small employee from one day to the other.
Okay. Can you bring me back to the beginning when you decided to start?
Yeah, I was starting my professional career as a paediatrician in a hospital, and always liked the idea of developing drugs. And I was with Austrian Biotech, Intercell at the time, and they were in vaccine development. And I was leading a project which was licensed from a small company and was brought up to licensure. And I thought that I should be able to do the same as those guys did, and was looking for a piece of technology, and I was making many phone calls and talked to people who I knew in the field, and I talked to an old friend in France, and he said, yeah, I have a good project and from the Institut Pasteur, and why don't we meet in Paris and talk to those guys? And the idea more or less was, at some time there will be pandemics, there will be new diseases, and we need to develop platform technologies to allow us to react quickly. And this was in 2008, 2009, the idea
2009.
to start the company.
Your partners were certain about pandemics that time. What was the topic back then?
There was swine flu was all over the place. There was a Zika crisis. There were chikungunya outbreaks. There were dengue outbreaks. It has been there and it will be there. But people don't really care about certain outbreaks. So we were quite surprised that people took the COVID outbreaks much more serious than other outbreaks in the past.
You thought about with the partners about a potential pandemic around a certain disease, and you had to pick one. How did you do that?
The understanding was that we need to find some kind of model disease, which in our case was chikungunya, which is a difficult disease and name because nobody can pronounce it. And the Institut Pasteur had some preliminary activities going on because some of the French overseas territory had some burden of disease, especially in La Réunion. And so we were starting this, and the idea was we validate this as a traveler's vaccine, and the technology should be then a plug-and-play technology, which would then be open for other disease X models.
You talked to the partner Pasteur. What happened next?
We were developing the vaccine for chikungunya, did phase 1 studies, phase 2 studies. In the meanwhile, there were a number of outbreaks like Zika virus, for instance. Zika was big in the US. Pregnant women didn't dare to leave their homes. It was big during the Rio de Janeiro Olympics, and where some of the athletes didn't want to travel to Paris. It's not really a breakthrough in terms of vaccine development. There were many vaccines there, but nobody really commercially thought about it. Then another milestone was CEPI, which was an initiative from governmental and non-governmental organizations, largely backed by the Gates Foundation also, who said many of those outbreaks vaccines are commercial failures, like Nipah virus, for instance, or Lassa virus. And they had the idea that if pharmaceutical companies don't dare to develop the vaccines, this non-profit organization should make the vaccine. So we were starting making a vaccine for MERS, which is similar to SARS, but something different. We made a vaccine for Lassa and for Nipah disease. And this allowed us to grow the company from like 2 or 3 people in the beginning until 35 people at the end of 2019, when we were starting a R&D collaboration on undisclosed vaccine target with Merck. No, I've never met him personally, no.
So this was 2009, 2010. How did success feel at that time?
I think one of the biggest successes for me was to have not total freedom as the CEO of a biotech company, but I had lots of liberties in how I spent the work I'm doing. And of course, I was not free at all. I had to talk to many investors. Not everybody I met was super friendly and super kind to me. I had nice and not so nice experiences with partners or employees. But I think the biggest success to me was to feel much more liberty in my day-to-day work than as I was employed in another company. So I think this was the biggest success. And commercially, the success was very much being able to close a financing round and secure the further development of the company. And one of the biggest success was the contract we got from CEPI in, 2015, I believe.
So it was quite some time between the beginning and the first big round,
Yes.
2015. How difficult was it for you keeping the faith throughout the years, knowing this is tough, this is difficult?
I think it started in 2008 and 2009 when I had my first discussions with bodies who would offer some non-dilutive fundings from governments, and they all said, this is now the post-Lehman financial crisis, it's so difficult to raise funds, and I thought it's super easy to do this now because nobody's founding a company now. So it's anti-cyclic swine circus now, and this will be easy for me. And it took us then more or less half a year, 9 months to get first investors traction, and then from signing the term sheet until cash was in a bank account, it was 12 months. And we had something like 500 euros in a bank account. And so it was super difficult in the beginning, and it was more likely to fail than to succeed in the first year. And I was naive enough or young enough to accept this. And I thought when this is not going anywhere in the beginning, then I go back to industry and find a new job. And I think this has changed over the years because I realized that even in difficult times, I was able to make it happen, so it will be possible again. But it was quite some sort of stressful. We never had funded the company for longer than 12 months during the 13 years.
Wow. There are companies right now not funded for more than 6 months. I think many people can relate right now. But you mentioned something, having optionality. What if this doesn't work?
I think optionality is something which entrepreneurs and founders should not have. Because if a founder or an entrepreneur has option 1, develop Themis. Option 2, go into industry. Option 3, go into HR. Option 4, going to this and that. With all the options, you don't take it serious. And I've seen this in my company after Themis. You need to this. You need to accept blood, sweat, and tears to make this happen. I don't think that if I or my key employees would have had the option to go back to Sanofi, to go back to the university, to go back to something else, then we wouldn't have tried hard enough.
I agree with that. It reminds me of a speech from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He once said, you shouldn't have plan B. You should always stay with plan A. Some biotech founders would say you need some slight optionality in your pathway. And that is also a little bit true, I think, but not like staying in the company or changing the company, but choosing a pathway within the company and trying to find ways.
Totally agree. You should have options. You should build options, but you should not have the option to take a better pay.
How did you feel at that time before Themis really made money? Was this a convenient place for you? Was this something you could live with?
I mean, before I started Themis, I was commuting to Germany. I was taking a flight every week, like many others do, and we got a baby during this time, and I thought I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And commuting when the baby was there, and then was starting the company more or less as a stay-at-home dad during this time. And I always felt that it was, on the one hand side, very easy for me, but I had many colleagues and workers with me who said, I never understood how you are able to have a call with a VC firm with the baby around you. And I think this has changed. And in 2020, when it was super normal, that everybody was sitting in their home and the children were running around. But I found this freedom for me super fine, and I accepted the fact that the company needs more funding, and eventually I will need to find a new job if the funding is not coming. So I was not super desperate, and all the people I hired accepted this.
I think this is very valuable to understand. Your main driver was liberty and the freedom of having time for your family, but also personal liberty, doing things that are important to you. And whenever this was over, you accepted it because it was a present for itself, right? To have the time to do things. I think this is an important element because you cannot lose, right? I think this is something that drove you, but also that kept you balanced, right? Speaking of balance, you play tennis now. Did you play tennis that time, or did you have other means to recover?
I mean, I played tennis all my life, more or less, and I did other things also. I tried to do some sports, but I was heavily traveling. Like in the last year, we were trying to go IPO, to do fundraising. It was a bit more difficult with international travel.
This means you left out the chance to do sports too. Did you feel that?
Yes. Yes, so like sitting in the plane every Sunday, fly to San Francisco, then fly over to New York the next day, and flying home on Wednesday is tough. And flying within Europe twice a week is also tough. So I don't want to.
So is this part of the personal price you have to pay that nobody sees?
I think for some times during fundraising, I don't know how fundraising now is because everybody's using Teams and Zoom and whatsoever. But those times it was super tough, and we had lots of meetings where we just flew into New York to go into a meeting room where there was a phone and the guy was sitting not in New York but in San Francisco.
So you have to be there.
I think we had to accept the fact that people who want to invest in you don't treat you like on a highest level sometimes. I was asking for something, and those guys, they very often gave the impression that they are king and not I'm the king.
I mean, you're speaking about difficult investor conversations, right? Is there a very good investor conversation?
I mean, we had many very good investor communications because at the end, investor invests into the person, and the investor needs to like you, and you need to like the investor, because if this is not going on a personal level, then nobody cares about the technology. I think the more advanced we were, the more serious the talks were. And I think The easiest fundraising was, of course, during COVID, where at the same time when we were preparing for the transaction, we were preparing for a Nasdaq IPO. And this was a super easy fundraising because everybody was thinking we need to have a COVID vaccine and where's the check? But before that, it was super difficult.
Tell me more about that last part. So the investor conversations changed up until COVID. Why was there a difference?
I think in beginning in March, people were taking COVID seriously. Not so much before that.
March 2020?
Yes. I think I remember we were having the last conversation I had in New York was March 8th. And we were talking to big VC funds, and we talked to them about chikungunya, which they didn't care. We talked to them about this strange disease out of China where we could offer to make a vaccine. And they said, no, we don't care about this. Talk about cancer. Why don't you make a cancer vaccine? And this was more or less when it all happened. And then more or less from one week to the other, companies like Moderna and Biotech have completely forgot cancer, and they have never done anything else than COVID vaccines, and same for us. So there were many companies finding a bonanza in this COVID vaccines and COVID diagnostics, COVID treatment field, of course. And I believe it was very difficult from the investors and also for big pharma companies to differentiate who's having a real product and who's having old ideas with no substance.
I mean, from outside, it could seem like a gold rush, right? But yes, you within a company are always certain that your product is the next big thing. Let's talk about the certainty or the conviction. I think it's a different type of conviction you need in the beginning, starting a company, but also developing it through and bringing it to the end, right?
I was always trusting the technology because it kind of worked in our hands. We had a very nice animal data. We had very nice phase 1 data. So we were always trusting in the technology. Commercially, it's another story. At the time when we were developing this, there were a number of technologies. Viral vectors were pretty hot. Nobody was believing into mRNA vaccines. There was lots of money going into companies like Moderna, but more in the idea of cancer and something else. But vaccines was, everybody thought that with a viral vector you can make a vaccine. But nobody trusted us that there will be an outbreak, you need to have pandemic vaccines, and nobody cared about the chikungunya vaccine. And when we made the transaction with Merck, where this was happening in May 2020, and this was the time where we were preparing to start the phase 1 study for COVID, and Moderna has started their phase 1 study already. And we were 100% certain that our vaccine would be successful in the clinics, would go to market, would go to approval, and would protect people. So we were, from a technical side of things, we were always very certain that this would work.
Was there ever a moment that challenged your certainty? Maybe a run rate less than 5 months or something else?
I mean, we had lots of difficulties. Like we had a manufacturing firm which developed our phase 1 product and broke almost half of our glass vials in the fridge. And like we were funded to do this phase 1 study, but we were not funded to kind of redo a manufacturing run, or we were working with companies who went out of money shortly before they should have started and things like this. I think in a biotech setting, a plan for something, and it always takes a bit longer and is a bit more expensive than you wish. So there were lots of technical hurdles, and we also had many investors who kind of gave us very good feeling after the meeting and then never wired money.
So would you say that it is wise to think You actually need twice as long and twice as much money.
It's very difficult to answer this because this also means you don't believe your plan. I think when you believe it can be done for 10 million, but your subconscious mind tells you, but it will take twice as long and will be much more expensive. I think people will read your mind. But I always tried to kind of play aggressively and execute aggressively, and I never planned for substantial backups or backup plans.
But how did you know that this is the right way?
I think the good thing was I didn't have the options.
So you had to make it reality, okay?
Yeah. So at the same time as we were funded in Austria, there was another company nearby, and all the people which were in this company, we know them, and they were in a similar setting, and we were funded more or less as a founder-funded company with very nice but maybe smaller European investors, and they were funded from one of the largest investors in Europe. We had Nobel Prize laureates in the company, and whenever we made a 5 million round, they made a 50 million round. And when we made a 10 million round, they made a 100 million round. But at the end, we were forced to be super focused. We were forced to work with minimal employees, minimal efforts, and really focused only on success. And I believe the advantage of this was that we didn't lose focus on the important things. But of course, we're more often lucky than unlucky, and we made right decisions more often than poor decisions.
So is this something that you take now with you in the future? When you work with other biotech companies, you are advisor, you're investor, right? The learning of you have to keep your resources low in order to be creative enough to make better decisions.
After we were happy campers in the Merck empire, there was a management buyout which was heavily funded from Merck. And I think this allowed a completely different mindset. And I think having the problem of being fully loaded with cash as a biotech company sounds better than it truly is. And
tell me more.
When I talk to founders, I believe they need to be super focused and super convinced that this will be a success and this will be their ticket to a life-changing experience. But it needs to be a completely different mindset of being an employee in a very much reglemented big pharma or corporate environment. And it's a completely different approach of risk-taking than we would see in a corporate setting, but also the mindset of saying, we have now funding for the next 3 years and we can do this and we can hire people and let's review in a year, spoils you. So it's much better to forced to be successful in a year than to say in a year, didn't work out like this, but let's see in a year from now. And I think a successful biotech company needs to be working under so much pressure to believe into the success and make the success happen.
That was your blueprint, having massive conviction that this has to work, and that was your superpower, probably also your recipe for success when you talk to investors.
Yeah, I think on the one hand side, it was a conviction, but it was not a conviction based on there's no data, but I'm so smart, I'm just convinced. And I think what made our success possible that we had scientific evidence and we have made progress. We made promises to investors and we delivered on those promises. Whereas many technologies are, compared to our technology, much more high-rise projects with difficult to achieve early evidence. So I was always trying to find something where evidence can be created in a near term.
Take it back to the moment when you found out that the Merck deal was real.
The Merck deal was super difficult because during this time, I mean, there were difficult and not so difficult things. Like I remember that it was on the Easter Sunday, which is a big thing in Europe, but everybody's on vacation, everybody has meetings whatsoever. But this was during lockdown. Everybody was sitting at home, kind of bored, and I talk about investors, I talk about senior management at Merck, I talk about lawyers. So everybody enjoyed having a phone call on a Sunday morning or Sunday evening on Easter Monday or Easter Sunday because they anyway couldn't meet their parents or whatsoever. So this was the easy thing. The difficult thing was that COVID was super emotional those times. Also, we had with the Institut Pasteur, we had some sort of public interest in France in this company, and there were certain phone calls where big name French politicians were in the call, and we had to balance like national interests in Europe, company interests, personal interest from the founders. We had investors who were invested for 12 years in the company and investors who were invested just 4 months in the company. So people were thinking, I want to get out of this company with a multiple of 5, this is good enough. And others said, we just went into the company, we put this to Nasdaq, and the sky is the limit for us. So this was the difficulty, but I remember I went to our lawyer on, I believe, May 25, Monday evening at 7:30. This was like the third meeting we had because the others were postponed because something was not doable. And the notary said, so we are signing today. And I said to the notary, we will see, it's 50-50. And this was like half an hour before the signing. So it was very difficult to get this done because there were so many interests in this transaction.
Investors.
It was not so much investors. It was really some of the European governments who had local interests.
Okay. So was it your dream deal at this point?
I think I remember we had one investor in the company. This was like during the C round. We had the option on the table to sell the company or to make the C round. We decided to make the C round, and then shortly after we had dinner, and she said, the deal was not good enough for you. You need to make a life-changing deal and not a deal which allows you to kind of pay for the private school of the kids. It should be a life-changing deal because you have worked so hard. And then she said, trust me, I will make you a life-changing deal. I'm very grateful to have had her as an investor and as a friend for many years, but I'm not sure how much of the deal she made and how much we have made.
Very nice. When you say to a notary, it's 50-50, what goes through your mind? Do you think about what alternatives they have? Do you hope?
We have made a large Series D round in November 19, and with this Series D round this was the first time we really had traction with larger US-based investors. So what we have done in the March-April timeframe, we have of course talked to investors, we have talked to companies like Sanofi and Merck and all those potential buyers. And we went for this dual tracking. And dual track is like the youngest, most inexperienced investors tells you from first day he talks to you, expect you to do dual tracking every day or triple tracking because you need to prepare for this and that and this and that. But we really prepared for a crossover round for Nasdaq, and we have had lined up a super prominent consortium, and everything was ready to be shared. We had a kickoff meeting with investment banks for the Nasdaq IPO, and this was happening in May, early May. Part of my time during these days was to kind of not piss off the investment bankers from the Nasdaq transaction. The alternative has always been if the Merck deal goes sour, then we still can go the Nasdaq route. But at some time, this horse would have been dead.
So you prepared alternatives, which is always a good recommendation in negotiations, to have alternatives ready.
But I think, in all fairness, we were working like a few people in our company, the lawyers, the investment bankers. We were working like from 8 in the morning until early in the morning, 7 days a week. I think this is possible for a few weeks, but maybe not for a few months.
Yes,
So I
of
think,
course.
we were super happy that this happened. And I think if we would have left the lawyer's office with no deal on this date, I don't know if the Nasdaq route would still have been possible, or if everybody would have been so exhausted that, because the IPO route would have taken us 3 more months or so.
So you thought about being exhausted or not having that the same pace. I mean, I think it's part of every entrepreneur, of every major business. When the CEO, the leaders don't have energy, nothing will happen.
During like heavy lockdown, so the good thing was I couldn't play tennis, I couldn't go on vacation, I couldn't do anything, so I was forced to stay at home and
Work, okay.
So this was the easy thing. Of course, there was a price for that, and I was happy that the transaction was over after a certain period of time.
What part of entrepreneurship do you miss? That moment, that wins, maybe?
No, I think this was nice. Of course, I think maybe it's like Christmas as a small child. My children are more happy the 24 days before they get the presents than when they see the presents. So I think being an entrepreneur means you'll never know how the future will be looking like. And of course, getting the transaction done, get also a financial return is of course super nice. But I believe the interesting thing is that you don't know what will happen.
I think that's also the reward, right? Embracing that uncertainty as a reward. How did that journey change you as a person? What is now important to you? What hasn't been important before?
I'm not sure if I've changed so much. I think during the deal, it was different because before the deal, I was very much in the media, because we were a company working in the COVID field in Austria, and I was having interviews and was in TV and in radio and so on. And this was, of course, doing many things with my ego. And then after the transaction, being a small employee of Merck, I was not longer in the media, but many people knew about the transaction, and people like to meet successful people or people which they believe are successful. And I think I had this feeling of being invincible after the deal. I had one person in our board, a close friend, who turned out developed into a close friend, and he had done transactions before, and he said, you need to be careful because the transaction is doing something with you. And he now refers to it as the post-deal crisis, because in the beginning of the deal, you have lawyers, journalists, and bankers, everybody tells you you're the king of the world. And then for some time, people like private bankers invite you to expensive dinners or do whatever. And of course, this is fading after some time. And I was having my job at Merck, and this was not fulfilling, to be honest.
What's fulfilling now?
I have tied my knots with Merck a year ago, and I'm trying to fund new companies. I'm trying to work with young entrepreneurs to make this happen. I'm working as a venture partner for a venture fund to make things happen.
So this is your next chapter, working for the venture fund.
It's really I'm there as a venture partner, not as a full partner. So I see my role really more as somebody who makes, I want to make my hands dirty. I want to have blood, sweat, tears. I don't want to sit in a boardroom and give good advice.
Okay, very good. Good to hear. In which phase are those companies right now?
Early stage. So it's
Early stage.
until sometimes animal data.
What are the advices you usually give those companies?
I think when it comes to optionality, a startup biotech company demands full attention, and you cannot like enjoy being a professor or enjoy being in this company and expect others to trust your company when you don't trust your company. I believe people need to accept to get burned. And I think that's more or less the most important advice. I've seen so many people who wanted to join me or the companies, but didn't want to get wet or dirty or whatsoever. Everybody likes to help a bit, fly to fundraising meetings, but doesn't want to get exposed. And I think you need to get fully exposed and take risks and accept the risks.
One more advice?
I think very often people fight with their egos. And I might not be much different here, but funding a company and ask investors, ask not non-dilutive funds, ask partners for meetings with a big ego is very difficult. I had so many meetings, hundreds of meetings where people said something like, I wish you all the best and I mean it, but this will never work. And I think you need to accept that rewards will take quite some time.
Very valuable. One last thing. Do you have a recommendation for a book or a movie or something that inspired you lately?
I saw the Facebook movie as they were fundraising. And of course, that's a recommendation because it's completely different than I have seen it. There's a very nice Netflix on how Spotify was created and funded, and including all sorts of founders' turmoil, founders' difficulties. I think that's something I would recommend. I'll
watch it again. Thank you very much for this episode. I really enjoyed it. It was great fun. We are at the end. Hopefully we see each other again here or somewhere else. And thank you very much again, Erich.
Thank you.
Willing to Win. Biotech Leaders Against All Odds. A podcast with biotech leaders for biotech leaders. Stories about conviction. The good, the bad, the ugly.